Hello friends, so today's video is going to be a review, both non-spoiler and spoiler, for Vagabond. Within both the non-spoiler and spoiler sections, I will be breaking the review up into parts, and so I'll have timestamps in case you'd like to skip ahead. But for the non-spoiler section, we'll be talking about the synopsis, the themes within this first arc, the art style, or more so art appreciation, because this has some of the most beautiful art, and then just some tropes that I personally really like, and I know a lot of you really like, and so I wanted to touch on those a little bit as well. The spoiler section will dive a lot deeper into the themes. We'll go into specific moments that I think really bring those themes to the forefront, and then also some standout moments. Maybe they're not necessarily representing any specific themes, they're just moments that I think probably a lot of you who have read it have noted as well, and then there might be some that I just personally got a kick out of or I thought were really amazing. Most of what I review on my channel is fantasy. This is actually historical fiction. It follows the legendary samurai Miyamoto Musashi, and this particular manga is actually based off of a story called Musashi. So it's kind of like samurai story Inception, but this was a real figure in history. This is sort of detailing his life, his journey, his discovery of his purpose. I think a lot of times with something as vague as finding purpose, or with one of the themes being inner peace, you can end up having a story that is very pretentious or leans on the pretentious side. Sometimes it can lack plot. And I don't think that was the case. With this introduction, I think we're very much seeing a man who has been mistreated throughout his life. One of the themes I found is internalizing other people's perceptions of you. And you see very early on that he has done this. He has been sort of seen as other and treated as different, and he's never really been somebody who has been able to fit in within society, within his village. There's definitely a sense of having honor or attempting to have honor when nobody honors you, when you have no reason to have honor, when you have no reason to respect everyone. And so he eventually finds what he thinks is his purpose, and the opening of the story is you getting these little breadcrumbs, you getting these little pieces of how perhaps he had a misguided purpose. I would almost say that the entirety of this first arc is about the death of misguided ideals. You think you know what you want for your life, you think you know what your purpose is, and then when that is taken from you and your whole worldview is taken away, what is there now to live for? And so that's a very powerful theme. That's a difficult theme to execute, and I think with this beginning, of course, we're not going to see all of that come to fruition, but you are going to start to see glimpses of where this journey is going to start. I was personally really surprised. Another thing that stood out to me was the way that there is emphasis placed on how vulnerability is a strength and how trust in other people is a strength, especially when you have no reason to trust other people, when you have no reason to be vulnerable with other people. Our main character, Takezo, at the beginning, he wants to be invincible under the sun. He wants to be somebody who can defeat anyone. He doesn't want to rely on anybody. He wants to be the greatest swordsman. And so he thinks that strength comes from being physically strong and having the ability to defeat anyone. And very quickly in this first arc, you are seeing how he is discovering that maybe that's not all there is to being strong. And then a theme that was actually really sad, but I think explored really well already, is themes of abandonment. I found this to be probably the most moving aspect of the beginning, and also one of the core themes that ties some of our characters together. You aren't introduced necessarily to this huge amount of characters, you don't have this enormous cast, but you do have a few people that pop up, and because our main character is sort of this lone vagabond type, you don't really expect to see him have these connections with other people, and I think it's through this particular theme that already I am seeing the connections with certain characters, and it makes me, I just want him to get a hug, you know? Very quickly, I want this character to have somebody hug him and care about him, and for him to accept that. It's one of those kinds of stories. I will dive a lot deeper into those themes and kind of go into some specific moments, specific scenes that I think represent them really well in the spoiler section, but I'm going to jump now into the art style and art appreciation. So I find that there's this misconception, usually with people who are not all that familiar with manga and anime. There's this misconception, especially in the West, that there is a specific art style that is consistent throughout all manga and anime, which isn't true. If you're familiar with manga and anime, you know that that is not true and that there are so many different kinds of art styles. And if ever there is a manga to point to prove that they are often very, very different, this one is it. Not only does it stand out just because its style is so beautiful, but the skill that it takes to be able to do panel after panel of art that is this good, it's incredible. So the style itself, there's kind of a mix from one panel to the next, and I think there's certain things that he does that make certain moments stand out. Sometimes he makes things more simplistic in order to have them, it's like the message within that panel is what needs to come across, and then other times it is the art style itself and how intricate it is and how detailed it is. Sometimes that's what is at the forefront. The artwork is also used really well to create motion, which you would want in a story where there's going to be a lot of action scenes, where there's going to be a lot of fights and duels. You want the motion to come across, and I think it definitely does in this story. But regardless, the end result means that you have so much versatility from one page to the next, even from one panel to the next. And then for some of the tropes that are used, I was actually really pleasantly surprised to see the Sunshine Grump trope. We also have the I'm going to save you so that I can fight you later. I mentioned in a video a little while back about if you like this manga or anime, check out this book, and then the opposite direction, and a book series that I think has that really well. It is geared toward a much younger audience, but Shadow of the Fox. That series, it's YA, but it has that same, well, if I'm going to duel you and if this is going to be an honorable duel, I have to wait until you've recovered and rescue from this one situation, and then we'll fight later. And I don't know why, I just find that trope really entertaining. I think it's because immediately there's this sort of, we are enemies, but we're going to befriend one another in the meantime, and then knowing where the end result is, it just creates this interesting dynamic between characters. And then, this is rather common, I would say, in a lot of manga and anime, but the he's so powerful that you see so often, where all these other characters, anytime they go up against someone, they immediately are shocked, like, there's no way he could possibly fight all of us. And then, what do you know? He fights everybody and takes everybody down. Like, he's so powerful, but he's so young. All of that just gasp-worthy type of moments is definitely present. And I would say usually it's more fitting for a story that is geared toward a younger audience. But in this instance, I think it works really well because of the fact that this was a real person in history, but they've almost become more myth. They've almost become more legend than man. And so I think having that present, I think it actually works toward this type of story. The last thing I'll note, and the thing that surprised me the most, is that the amount of humor that we get in this. And I think it's one of those, if you've ever read the book Blood Song by Anthony Ryan, that book is rather serious, but when the funny moments happen, there's something about the juxtaposition that makes it almost even funnier. It's unexpected. Jumping into the spoilers now, I'm going to elaborate on some of those themes that I talked about in the non-spoiler section, and I'm going to start with the one about internalizing someone else's view of you. So early on in the story, we see that Takezo seems to really like when people call him a demon, when people see him as demonic, when they see him as monstrous and barbaric. He tells himself that he likes the sound of that. He places value on people's perception of him because in this stage of his life, being seen this way validates his skill. It validates this goal he has of becoming the absolute best fighter. And then this is sort of reinforced when we get a couple of flashbacks throughout the story of how his father treated him, which, seeing as this is my first time jumping into Vagabond, I'm very interested to see more about his childhood, but how his father treats him is definitely a big part of it. And then after that, we see how villagers treat him. And it just, once again, it's like the snowball effect of everybody telling him what he is. And so he never has the opportunity as a young boy to think of himself as anything else. I will get to the scene with the monk that occurs at the end of this arc, because that is probably the most notable. So I'll get to that, but that moment sort of is the breaking apart and the breaking down and telling Takezo that he can be something else, that he can strive for something else, and that he doesn't have to be this person everyone has seen him as. And that moment's so emotional because you see, I'll get to that part, but that moment was, I was like, oh, This is so sad. Another one of the themes, though, I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into is the loss of his worldview, the loss of what he thought he was meant for. So beyond just his internalized perception, then we have, okay, well, this is what he thought he was. So when he loses that, what happens? And we see very early at the opening, the very beginning, it's after a loss and he's a survivor. And very early, you don't actually see a whole lot of emotions from Takezo. And the few moments that you do, I think you can really zero in on and dissect. And one of them would be the very beginning when he and Matahachi are talking to one another. They're discussing the fact that they weren't even really soldiers. They weren't even really given a chance. They were given machetes to cut down the grass. And there's bitterness in that scene. There's frustration there. And then it probably doesn't come across as anything other than just we're mad that we lost this battle. But then later when you're getting into how there's one scene where he's putting on as he's becoming a soldier, and you have to imagine that this is him finally getting to live out what he thinks he's meant to do. And so it makes you kind of go back and see that opening a little differently, and you see that bitterness as more than just we lost. It's not just that we lost this battle for Takezo, it's that he lost everything he thought he was meant for. And this ties into the abandonment, I think, as well, because you see that he was abandoned by his family. You see that everybody's always nobody's ever really taken the time to be there for him. And so, in a way, I think he's not only been abandoned by this purpose that he's put himself into, but also this army, basically. Everything that he thought he would get out of this, he didn't. And then on top of that, not only has he been discarded, but now he is even being hunted. And he's being hunted by people who were supposed to care about him. And all of this adds up to him being punished for doing the very thing he thought he was supposed to do. You can see why there's that moment where he sort of looks happy when he decides he's going to be a vagabond. And even in that moment, it seems like, oh, not quite Takezo. I don't think you've quite figured it out what you're meant for, what you're supposed to be doing, because while he seems excited about that concept or that path for his life, it still is rooted in, all right, well, everybody's abandoned me, so by being a vagabond, I don't have to put my faith in anyone. I don't have to put my faith in anything. I can just wander and be and exist and become the greatest, but I'm going to become the greatest on my own now. I want to get a little further into the discussion of abandonment as well. I don't know how many other people really think that this is much of a theme. I've looked up nothing about Vagabond because I wanted to ensure that everything I thought of it was fresh and was not influenced by anybody else. And so for me, though, this was maybe one of the biggest things because it's not just something that Takezo experiences. You see Atsu as well, which Matahachi is almost like the physical representation of abandonment because he abandons Atsu, he abandons Takezo, when Takezo even's like, hey, if you're still alive, say something, and then he just goes with that lady, and my prediction is he's probably gonna flake out on that too, because he's a weasel. Oh my gosh, I already can't stand this character, and I find that he's the kind of person where, you know those kids who want to do everything and they tell their parents, I want to try gymnastics, and their parents are like, okay, but you got to stick to it because it's kind of pricey, and they go and they try gymnastics for a couple weeks. They're like, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to play piano, and they go to piano, and then they're always floating around from one thing to the next, and they never actually stick with anything. Matahachi does that, but with people. Whatever shiny new thing there is, it's like he just goes right towards that. And he's not malicious, but he's flippant and he's careless with people. And I can't stand that. It's so frustrating. And on top of that, I think he's a dream snatcher. He's one of those people that he sees somebody else and he latches onto them and he latches onto what they want. But this gives him the ability to never actually take responsibility for his actions. And you see that with his mother, Granny. You see that because she's viewed that for him. She keeps thinking, oh, Takezo dragged him off to war. And I don't really think that's what happened. I think that he latched on to Takezo because Takezo was unique and he was different and he was that shiny thing. And so he attached to, I'm so frustrated with this character. Sorry, I'm kind of ranting. But he just latches onto him because he's this oddity and he's unique. And then he decides he's going to exist in his shadow, but he's not going to put in the effort the same way that Takezo does. He's just going to tag along. But then it's heartbreaking because you see when Atsu is talking to the monk about how she cared about him because he cared about Takezo, this person that nobody else seemed to want to be there for because everybody feared him. And she was like, well, he continued to be his friend despite what everybody else thought. And at first it seems like he was a good friend, but I really don't think that was the case. But with Maruhachi abandoning Takezo, with him abandoning Atsu, he ends up putting everybody else in such a difficult position because there's the idea of having honor when nobody honors you, nobody respects you. So you see Takezo go, when he's being hunted, he goes out of his way to tell Granny and Atsu he's still alive, but he's not coming back. He didn't have to do this. He didn't have to make this effort, but he did, so that they wouldn't always be wondering, that they wouldn't be in pain. And in doing this, it led to Granny thinking, no, he would never do that. He would never, possibly, it's because you're a bad influence. She can't just see how he actually is. And so there's so many consequences. And then that leads to her going out of her way to mistreat Takezo. And on top of that, the very beginning, he's just laying there. And who is it that actually comes back for him? It's Takezo. And he doesn't even have the decency to let him know when the brigands come. Ugh. I hate this character already so much. If you all like him, that's okay. And I'm sorry for ranting, but I do not like him. We'll see if he gets any kind of redemption. I don't know. It's going to be difficult. He's very annoying. Anywho, moving away from him. Atsu, she's pleasant. I mentioned in the non-spoiler section how there is the Grump and Sunshine, and that's very much Takezo and Atsu. There's that one little panel where the monk is telling the samurai, you have all these villagers going out and searching for him, and all you want is for this beautiful woman to pour you sake. And she's like, beautiful woman! And that's one of the examples of just the story having a silly moment. And most of the time, not all, but most of the time, when there was a funny moment, it involved Atsu. And sometimes Takezo, like their interactions when she's trying to feed him, when he's tied up, and she keeps just poking him or dropping the food. And she's like, oh, come back again. She's just so herself, and she's so delightful. And I mentioned how bitterness at the beginning is one of the few times you really see a whole lot of emotion from Takezo, but that moment when he hears that she's turning away from Maruhachi's family, and he thinks, good for her. And I'm like, yeah, it is good for her. She's awesome. She can't help but be anything but what she is. And I always like characters like that, and it ties into the idea of there being strength in vulnerability and trust, and the monk even labeling her as the strongest person in the village because she just immediately places that in other people. And I think what is so powerful about that, she doesn't fear Takezo because of what everyone else says. She just trusts in his humanity. She trusts in the fact that he's a human being who deserves respect. I wanted to wrap up this entire review, this entire chat, with the ending of this arc, which is that really powerful moment with the monk and Takezo, and how now that he thinks he has failed, he just wants to die. And the monk, who is very silly, there's a lot of very silly moments with him, but he has the moment where he says, there is no light for those who do not know darkness. Live on and endure the shadows. And then he adds, and brightness shall come your way. And I think it's very intentional that right after he says that, you see Atsu. And again, that just fits so well into the Sunshine Grump. Literal light, the sunshine trope, is Atsu. But the fact that she is this representation, if Maruhachi is the representation of abandonment, I feel like Atsu is the representation of peace, of being able to trust in others, of being able to find happiness and light. And so I just find that ending, after how tragic it was that he wanted to end his own life, he just wanted somebody to end his life for him. He just wanted it all to be over. To have that little glimpse, that light at the end of the tunnel, I just thought was such a beautiful way to wrap that up. And on that note, I'll go ahead and wrap up our review/chat of this first arc of Vagabond. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.